Welcome to the Palm Court Podcast. Mike Palmer here, joined as always by Megan Citron and Grant Balfour. Welcome back to the podcast, folks.
Thank
Hi,
you.
happy to be here.
And we are joined today by Stephen Walker, who has been covering the story at New College for the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. Stephen, welcome to the Palm Court Pod.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for your coverage. It's been helpful for those of us who maybe aren't in Sarasota to try to keep track of what's going on. You know, we get a lot of information from alums and whatever connections we might have. Once something is in a paper of record, you know, you feel like the coverage gets a little deeper, and you've been doing this for a little bit of time now. So we'll get into more of that with you. But before we get into your coverage and New College, can you catch us up a little on who you are and how you got to this point in your professional life?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Stephen Walker. I'm a reporter with the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. Before this, I have worked jobs at the Orlando Sentinel. I worked an internship there. I was at the Independent Florida Alligator, which is a student newspaper on the campus of the University of Florida. I should also mention, in the context of this is my first job out of college. So I graduated college in 2022 and came here about 2 days after I walked the stage and started working. So yeah, this is my first job. Been obviously very eventful time here so far. But yeah, before working here, was in college, did the student journalism thing.
Yeah. Go Gators. You could probably say go Gators with feeling, I would think, right?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because it's like a thing at the Alligator where at least when I was there, we would emphasize, hey, we are not Gator fans. At least the ones on the sports desk are like, we are not Gator fans in our capacity.
Independent.
Yeah,
exactly. So we would you would get chastised in the newsroom if you walked in and, you know, the football team just dropped a really dumb game to Kentucky, which they tend to do. And then you say, I can't believe we blew that. And you said, you know,
Hey, come on.
hey, whoa, what do you mean we? On the team. So yeah,
journalistic integrity, Stephen. Let's go. Come on.
Exactly. But now that I have graduated and I still have my diploma not framed, though, yeah, I could say go Gators with my chest, even though nowadays it's kind of a moot point because they're not great at most things. So
right. But your coverage is interesting in that context where you don't read like a recent graduate. At least I didn't really think about who you were really. I just was thinking about the reporting, which seemed pretty spot on, at least like really in-depth coverage, I guess. So can you describe how you wound up picking up the story of New College and how that kind of evolved? Because you're saying you started in 22. A lot of this stuff was just about in flight or had just kicked off relatively soon after you started.
Yeah, so I started May of 2022 here. My official job title is education reporter. So Sarasota has a very active school board and school district. And so for the first, like from May of 22 until January of 23 was pretty much 100% schools. There was an election that year that was and still is pretty much a lot of my job is covering the school district. And so that's what I was doing for the most part when I got here. And I thought that was very eventful, still is, obviously.
Can I ask, was Bridget Ziegler already like a big deal at that point?
Oh yeah. Bridget Ziegler's been a huge deal for a long time. I had actually never heard of her until I got here.
Now everybody knows.
So she's obviously become a much bigger deal, but she was a founder of Moms for Liberty, which Moms for Liberty would tell you, well, if she left after a month, it's like, no, but she still is a champion of that movement. And so she predates a lot of this, and she's been very prominent for a while. So much so, I mean, it's funny you mentioned this, and this is kind of an aside. Moms for Liberty was founded by 3 people. One is Bridget Ziegler, the other is Tina Deskovich, and Tiffany Justice are the 3 names. And I'm pretty sure 2 of those are on the East Coast in like Brevard and Indian River, and then the other, and Bridget's in Sarasota. So I grew up in Cocoa Beach, which is in Brevard County. And so it was kind of a really funny joke I had with some colleagues. It's like, man, I just can't escape Moms for Liberty because, you know, you grow up one place, you come back to another, and they're both Moms for Liberty. Like the founding county is interesting.
It's propagating everywhere. But I followed your coverage of the school board before any of this New College stuff happened. And I was really impressed by you going to these meetings and just picking out the most absurd things. And then it just was snowballing and becoming more and more absurd and dramatic and circus-like. I feel like you got a very good training through that to then take on what happened at New College
Yeah,
shortly thereafter.
my second day on the job was a school board meeting, and my editor's like, if you're not ready for it, like we can send the person who's been covering them in the interim while you get up to speed. And I'm like, no, it's fine. I'll go. And it was a meeting where Tom Edwards, one of the board members, he was filling in for the chair, and the Moms for Liberty and conservative crowd at the time, who were in the minority at that point on the board, were getting rowdy in the board chamber. And Tom Edwards just completely adjourned the entire meeting. He's like, "Get out! Like we'll finish this another time." And so that was it was kind of I characterize it kind of as getting like a kid getting pushed in the pool. It's like
Yeah.
you sink or swim. And my editor was like, "I'm so sorry." It's like, it's fine. This is great. So yeah.
And have you always pursued education or journalism? Like that was an area that you were interested in and you wanted to pursue?
So my background is in political journalism. When I was at the Orlando Sentinel, I covered politics, like state legislature stuff and local things, as
Yep.
well as business, because that was part of the desk too, was business. And
Mhm.
so politics and business. When I was at UF, I worked for a wire service they run called Fresh Take Florida, which
Oh
covers
yeah.
the legislature. And I was with them for a couple semesters, wrote stories about bills. And I always liked taking the story about the bill and like kicking it down a few thousand feet to like the ground level
Yeah.
and
What does
actually
this mean to me? Yeah.
yeah. And like an example, so this isn't really a bill, but they were doing redistricting
Oh
at this
right. Yeah. Big deal.
and they had drawn out a district. There's a small town in Florida called Madison. It's a
Mhm.
historically Black town, population's largely like pretty overwhelmingly Black, and they're represented by a Black congressman. I think Al Lawson was his name.
Is that in Jefferson County?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
We know
Is-
Jefferson County now. So
Yeah. Oh, right. Richard Corcoran.
yeah.
Yeah. So Madison was drawn. It was part of it. It had a Democrat
Right.
as its representative, and it was redrawn. And basically, Al Lawson completely lost his seat, and then it was represented by the guy who represents Jacksonville. I could have that wrong,
Mhm.
but the
Yeah.
congressman lost his seat, and he was the one of the only Black congressmen from Florida. You of course have like Byron Donalds and others, but like Al Lawson was theirs. And so I went to this town and kind of talked to the people there. It's like you're losing your congressman, who there aren't many congress people who are minorities, at least from Florida. And so it's like, do you feel like you're losing representation? And I wrote that story, which actually ended up winning an award,
Mm.
which was nice. But yeah, that it's so to fill back into what you're asking, the reason, like my background is in political journalism, mostly because I like to tell stories about how policy affects people. And so then when I was applying for jobs pretty frantically my senior spring, definitely didn't want to move back to Michigan with my father. So I was applying frantically, heard back first from Sarasota, and my professors were saying, "That's a great job, you should take it." I'm like, "It's
Yeah.
education." And they're like, "That's politics." And I'm like, "Okay." And so obviously great advice from my
Yeah.
professors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Such
That
good
makes,
advice. I
yeah.
mean, could you have ever imagined how political it was going to be? I mean, it's
So I didn't know. I knew that Sarasota itself was like a pretty conservative hotbed. At least it's
Yeah.
become one. And my professors were saying like that is going to be one of like the hotbeds politically in that sphere, and you're going to be right in the thick of it. And so I was really worried. Like I knew I had a lot of peers who got fellowships with like the Washington Post and the New York Times and national outlets elsewhere, and I also went for those too. But when I got this job, my professors really emphasized, they're like, you're going to be getting great clips, and you're going to be you're going to be getting great experience here. And
Mhm.
like the big things will come, like those things are down the road in your career if you want them, but like this is valuable experience. So that's why I really picked this job, and then obviously have had a great time. So
And then what about New College? Like, did you, growing up in Florida and then going to UF and being in Orlando, were you aware of New College? Like, what was your awareness like? And then how far in did it kind of resurface for you?
yeah, the first time I ever heard the three words, New College of Florida, 4 words. That's a UF education right there. The first time I heard those words in that order was January 6, 2023.
Got
I
it.
had
Right
never,
on.
ever
Yeah.
heard of New College of Florida. And I did my research on schools, but when I was applying, right? And so yeah, they're like, oh yeah, journalism, UF #1, baby. Woo. And I was like, all right, I want to go to UF. And then luckily got in. So yeah, I never crossed my mind to go to New College. I had never heard of it until I started working here. Even in the first year or so I was here
That's
before
interesting. Yeah, I
stuff,
guess the school
they
board
would,
stuff was kind of taking up a lot of the oxygen, I imagine.
yeah, the higher ed section of my beat really came into prominence because of New College, everything going on. I wasn't really focused much on it. I think I got press releases from them, but they weren't things that like it wasn't a
Yeah,
newsworthy thing. And so it's like, okay, they're holding a fundraiser. I'll send it off, or like they usually just go to our letters section or our community section, and some other editor posts it. And
yeah,
so it's like it's not a story. And so really, I mean,
Hmm.
I would learn about what it was in January. And then that's when I started covering it, was me and Zach Anderson, our politics editor.
right.
Uh, well, he just took a job for USA Today covering Trump, but
Mm.
at the
Yeah, I
time,
saw that. I saw that. Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome. He deserves it in the world. But he and I were like tag team in this meeting because every outlet in the world was there.
Mhm.
And I just remember like sitting back and watching things happen and being like, this is going to be probably my entire beat for at least a while. And it was. And Zach kind of handed it off to me in large capacity because Zach was doing a lot of heavy lifting on it when the trustees were getting appointed, but like the before the meeting actually happened where they were doing that forum, and like in the immediate aftermath. And I really took over completely around like end of February, March time
Mhm.
of last year, when it was completely, I think that was around when DeSantis announced his presidential candidacy. And that's when Zach was like, it's all you. And so,
Right.
all right. And it's been mine pretty
That's
much.
when Corcoran got named too, right? Like
He was
your
named
career and
immediately.
his.
He was named immediately after Pat Ocker got fired.
Mhm.
Right.
They
That one.
said, we want
That's
Richard Corcoran, but he's not available right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so we'll do Brad Thiessen, and then
Yeah.
right.
Corcoran will come in March. And so I remember when they did that because it was actually reported before Ocker even got fired. Yeah, but pretty much when he got here and I got here coincided.
But then your coverage, I guess you were learning as you go, which is an interesting aspect of the reporting too, because you weren't particularly close to the story of New College really up to the point of January 6th and then Pat Oker's being removed. How did you start to understand the scope of what was going on, and how did you start making connections between what's happening at New College and stuff that your readers would need to understand?
Hmm. Well, it was interesting because I think not knowing anything about New College really helped in the perspective of like if a reader knows nothing about New College, which I felt like a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't, or at least they had an idea of what they thought it was. Like for me, coming in completely blind, I have the basic questions that I have. It's like, well, what is this? Well, why
Mhm.
is that? Like, why do you do that? What's the tradition behind that, where people might not even think about it? Or like this is a thing interviewing anybody in higher ed. I didn't cover higher ed, but I was the editor at the Alligator, and so I hired people, and somebody who had hired was our university administration reporter, and so I had to know a little bit about higher ed governance, but I didn't really understand from like a reporting level why tenure is so important.
Mm.
And I had to learn because my editor talks to me. He says, "Why does tenure matter? They're denying these professors tenure. So what? Like
Mhm.
why? Like tell that to like get the reader the answer." And so I'm like, "That's a good question because I don't know. Like
Right.
I didn't know." And so I had to ask, and that's really good because maybe another. And when I say talking to higher ed people who just kind of assume everyone knows tenure is super important because that's just a fact to
Right.
them, is that
Right.
tenure is important. Well, why? And so then when I go in there and get those questions from a completely outsider perspective as a
Yeah.
reporter, you can really dig through the noise of it all. But then in terms of the scale, I mean, even talking to people, they're like, this is pretty unprecedented, at least the speed at which things were happening, especially because I went and I've talked to like athletic directors at small schools and, different former presidents, former chancellors, and just being like, what's the ETA on a new athletics program?
Right.
And the answer is not 6 months, but that is the
Yeah.
answer from college. So,
Yeah.
uh,
And I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen, because this is in fact our March Madness episode. So we are celebrating March Madness. This will be going out in March. You're a sports fan, perhaps more Orlando Magic than March Madness. But yeah, it's an interesting time of year. And even looking back over the past year, let's say your beat's been hot on the education front at New College for a year now. How would you tell that story? How would you tell folks relatively briefly? How would you catch someone up who didn't really know what was going on? The floor is yours. How would you tell the story of New College?
The story of New College. I would say New College is this the story that I've like if I was in an elevator and had to tell somebody about my job and what I covered, right? It's like I've been covering New College of Florida. It's the smallest public university in the state of Florida. They have had kind of a deep-rooted tradition of being a little different. It's a different academic structure than most other schools. They don't have grades, they have thesis for their undergrads, and they do things differently, but their numbers objectively have fluctuated over the years, so much so that they almost got merged into another college. Things have gone back and forth in the legislature about that. So the governor, who was told about this by a donor, that New College could be ripe for the picking almost. And so he saw vacancies or an opportunity to make a change. So he kind of took the mantle and completely flipped their board, fired their president, appointed an ally, and kind of just pushed for complete change there because he felt it went too far in one other direction. And now they're trying to bring it back to what they see as the middle.
Yeah,
So
and then remember it's March Madness, so you got to talk about sports now in your pitch. So what's
right.
going on about sports, and why is that interesting?
Yeah, sports at New College is kind of what's driving their enrollment change. So they will tell you that they've hit record enrollment numbers, which is objectively true. But if you account for the fact that they've established this athletics department, if you like, it's a net negative actually. So if you take out the athletes from that number, which they will tell you can't do that because those are students and they are. But if you were to say without the athletes, how many students are you getting here? There's less students than there was before. I don't have the number exactly on that, and I'm just kind of saying that because at the time when I was reporting admissions about that time last year, so it should be, there's another story I'm going to work on pretty soon once they finalize this upcoming class. But the fact is that this athletics department is the driving force behind a lot of their recruitment. They reach out to tons of kids. They just got approved to join the NAIA, which is a Division III, I believe. Or it's not even NCAA, but it's about that level of competition. Yeah, but they'll tell you that the athletic department is like a normal thing at a college of this size. If you look at something like William and Mary or other small, like liberal arts colleges, about a third of their student body is athletes as well. That's what at least New College has pointed out to me, and I've reported that. But at the same time, William and Mary's athletic department didn't bore fruit in just 6 months. Very fast for them. So
I think it's interesting. I mean, that there's not a single existing student who I believe has ever been on any of these teams. They only they transplanted people for the teams, but didn't recruit a single person from the actual student body. I think that's pretty unprecedented.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that the school didn't just not have any sports. They had like intercollegiate club sports from my understanding, but they came in saying this is unprecedented, like we're adding these sports, but there has been like New College club basketball, New College club powerlifting, sailing, these things. But,
I'm a sailing booster. I actually own one of the old boats. So yeah.
It was much more informal, and it is part of the culture war initiative. Their admissions tactics are part of flipping the culture in line with what the new trustees on the board are really looking to do. That's the aspect that is extremely political. How are you dealing with the polarization and the politicization of this particular topic? You came into an education beat, you knew the school boards were there, but in a lot of ways, this is getting national coverage in terms of culture wars on campus and higher ed. How have you been navigating that?
I mean, the polarization, I think being in the school board chambers every other week for almost 2 years now has really trained up my ear a bit on these things, and it's something where people have asked me, like at public forums on journalism around here I've spoken at, and like just even off the record conversations with people. They're like, how do you navigate these two sides, or all these different sides on a topic? And the answer really is like, you have to have a trained ear for crap. I don't know if we can curse on here.
You can do whatever you like. Yeah.
You just have to have a trained ear for that, because there is two sides to every story, or at least very multifaceted angles on a lot of things. But knowing that like being racist is not a valid opinion is something to like, oh, but there is two sides to the idea that Black people should be able to vote. I guess if you really want to go down this route of there's two sides to that argument, at least go back in time, right? But we look at this like, hey, one side is they're people, they can vote, they're citizens, and the other side is just racist. And so do you want to amplify a bigoted perspective? And this, you see this on the school board, where you have people coming and calling the one gay member on the school board a pedophile just because he's gay. Like, I at first was like thinking, do I want to amplify this idea, like this what happened? But I wrote the story about it and had it as the big thing, because it's what ended the whole meeting ended up being about that. And so that's what the story's about. But like, if someone, like, I've had it before where people come to the school board and just say some of the most insane things, and they don't make the story because you don't want to amplify bigotry or amplify these things. And so you have to have the ear for that, but at the same time you have to hear everybody. You can't just like block it out. So and I think this is something I'm like, I think an open-minded person. I like to hear what a lot of people have to say, just as a human perspective. And I think obviously that works well with my career choice here. But hearing these new college students, at least the ones who used to be here, and some of course still are, but that, and then juxtaposed with what I hear, because I talked to Richard Corcoran, I talked to Nate March, the communications guy at New College, I talked to the people from what is called the new regime, right, at New College. And so you hear both sides of this story, and I try to really thread the needle down the middle of like, look, I'm going to tell the story here, and like Nate's not going to like the fact that I included this source who's very critical, but at the same time, just because I'm having this source that's super critical of the administration, like the New College statement on this is also going to be in the story, right? It's not like I just block out what they say or what they do.
Right. It's also like, it's a time for conspiracy theories and being careful about not falling prey to them. But at the same time, it's also, there are conspiracies out there. There are people who are plotting to take over things and exert their influence and change culture and, get big contracts. How about that element? How much investigative journalism have you been able to do? How have things been kind of like breaking in terms of the story behind the story at New College? Because it does feel like there is a history of corruption, at least associated with President Corcoran, based on what was happening in Jefferson County. How much are you tracking that side of the story?
In terms of like the story behind the story, is like, from a journalism perspective, like you have the daily stories and you have enterprise stories, which at least when I was the editor at the Alligator, I would tell our desks and reporters, like, one is what happened, and then the enterprise is why it happened, or what's going on. The big crutch, I would say, for investigative journalism like that, like you see in enterprise, is public records and off the record background conversations. Because like I wrote the admission story about the new change tactics that they've employed to recruit these students, and I had off the record conversations with admissions officials that were, they predated Richard Corcoran, but they were still there, and they would tell me about, Richard Corcoran came into our admissions meeting in March, like, fist slammed, saying like, we need this many students, and likened it to the SEAL team operation to get us.
That's right.
And so I'm saying, okay, you're telling me these things. We're not on the record right now, nor do you want to be on the record because it's your name. So tell me how to find that out. And so basically I've always likened it to being, I'm looking through a haystack of crap. And they're a magnet for me, and looking for that needle. They're going to attract the needle. They're going to tell me where to look. They're going to give me the idea of like, request emails from this person on this day with this keyword. and then I'll find it where I would never find that on my own. And
Yeah.
so, you talk about like conspiracy theories, people saying, well, they're plotting this or that. As the extent of what I'm able to report on, you can really get to some of the bottom of things. At least, a smart person in government who doesn't want people to know what they're talking about doesn't do these things, but it still doesn't matter, where you have conversations over email that are on public record, text messages that are public record, things like that, where you can get an idea and shape around, and you talk to people who may be willing to speak with you on condition of anonymity about what's going on, and you can kind of start to build a narrative of what's going on. And because it's one thing to go to the new college board meeting and hear Richard Corcoran say, we have a record incoming class, these are their numbers. And it's like, okay, sure, how did it get there? What's behind that number? And then you go dig deeper, request records, request numbers, talk to people in the admissions office, make connections through your sourcing, saying like, I'll talk to Amy Reed and be like, hey, this is a hypothetical, this isn't actually how it went down, but like you talk to someone like Amy Reed or somebody at the college that and say, hey, I'm looking to speak with someone, could be this specific person or so and so, about something, and I'm willing to have it be off the record, I just need to know more. And so then you can start to know, you can start to dig through the noise a little bit, or dig through at what the surface level thing is.
Yeah.
I actually have a question about that, because sunshine laws used to be super strong in Florida. Florida kind of invented them. They've been getting a lot weaker over the past like year. Have you run into problems with like public records requests, like not turning up stuff because people just stall it out or manage to hide something that they shouldn't be hiding or something? I don't know.
I haven't ran into much. I know that there is people who will do these like pretty broad records requests, or these like ambitious ones where I mean the exemption list is growing, sure, of what is not, and what isn't is not public record. At least for my sake, like I find the devil in the details of the emails and the text messages and things you can get of correspondence as well. Like it's hard in higher ed anyways, and K-12 as well, with student privacy laws, getting most of anything at all. Like I want to know if I want to write a trend story for K-12 about discipline, seeing like which schools had the worst offenders, which schools had the most disciplinary reports of what kind, and do like a data breakdown. It's gonna be super hard to get that data, because those, you can request, I don't want it in student names, but this and that. So there's exemptions there. But in terms of like I've had really good luck, and it's also just about knowing the people who are it was something we learned in J school, but also just like in life, like you have to know the gatekeepers of information,
Right.
and
Yeah.
be on good terms. And so Nate March isn't the gatekeeper of public records, but he is the gatekeeper of certain things. And so, have a good relationship with that person, being like, hey, you know me, I know you, we've worked together, and you give me slack, I give you slack on things, but like work with me here. And so the same thing at the school district, I know the records clerk, I know them, like I've gone to their office. And so when they see something I'm requesting, they know it's not just a random person requesting something that, I'm sure the school district in Sarasota got dinged 100,000 times in their records department asking for Bridget Ziegler's emails this past December. I wonder why. But like when I go up to them and ask for it, they know who I am. And so you can break through the noise a little. But I personally haven't had any issues obtaining public records on my end. I also tend, if I get a like no respondent records email back, like, oh, there's nothing, I usually blame myself, which is probably not always the case. But I think, okay, how could I have formulated that request better? How can I narrow my search? How can I do these things? Because I would say, like, if you're going to talk public records law across states, like Florida, despite of course there being, restrictions happening here and there, it's still among the broadest public records law there is. There's a reason why Florida Man is such a meme, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Those crime reports are so publicly accessible. Like specifically the new College of Florida baseball player who just got arrested last month.
Right.
I was looking for his arrest report, and it took me 2 seconds to find,
Right.
because it's on the docket.
Mhm.
So, there's other places in other states where, a county court, in order to get their docket, you have to go through an email chain for 2 weeks to find it. But in Florida, you can look up a name and a court and just get everything you need. So
Yeah. You mentioned the baseball story. What are the active things that you're tracking related to the story of New College?
that you can talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I'll say, and I've mentioned before that I like in another to people who've asked, like I'm doing another admission story to, you know, kind of track that progression from year to year, like year over year. Cause the fact is, like, with all the students that left and this being the second year of the athletes, like, New College is going to be completely different. It already is.
I think there's some interesting stuff happening this second semester with admissions as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm keeping track of the baseball player as they go through court, because it's something I told the legal department at New College and Nate. It's like, because criminal justice is not my background in reporting, and I
Yeah.
don't really care for a lot of criminal justice reporting, more so because a lot of outlets just find easy page views and posting a bunch of mugshots. And that was the case in Gainesville. It was the case here with other outlets, and it's the case everywhere. But for me, it's like, if I'm going to report on this baseball player who, you know, people were dinging me online for posting his name, but at the same time, he's 19 years old and he's an adult. But on the other end of that, I'm following this story through, and if he gets exonerated, that's a story too. And that's what I told Nate
Yeah.
March. Like, I'm gonna go to his arraignment hearing, and if he gets all the charges dropped, that's another story with his name on it. So I'm just writing what's public. I'm writing what it is, and it's not like he's a 15-year-old kid who, you know, the Associated Press guidance on minors being
Right.
in crime stories is like, don't write their name, because
Yeah.
you know, they're minors, and it gets gray when you talk about they're being tried as adults, but like, this is an adult that it happened with. So, but yeah, I'm tracking that story, planning on it. He has an arraignment next week, I believe. So
Yeah, 22nd, I remember.
and yeah, I wrote the New College 1 year later story, but just keeping track of the trends. Richard Corcoran has an evaluation in April, so I'll be looking at that.
Right, yeah.
I've been trying to get a one-on-one with Richard Corcoran for a while. I had one scheduled in January, and he backed out. And then, so
I've got a question about that too, actually.
yeah.
Did you read the Catalyst, the student paper?
So I have a beef with the Catalyst in terms of
Okay.
their stories don't show up on Google, and they don't
Yeah.
show up anywhere. I have to like get sent a link to their Catalyst stories,
Uh-huh.
and you know, they write a lot, but I never see any of it. And so when somebody asked, "Did you read the Catalyst story?" I'm like, "Dude, I didn't know Catalyst. I didn't know the Catalyst wrote anything about it. Like, I don't see it. Like, at least with the Alligator, when I was running it at UF, I took a lot of pride in the fact, if you looked up University of Florida and clicked the news tab
Yeah,
of Google,
you find it now.
and so that's a search engine optimization issue, which I've talked to them about before. But no, what were you? Did they write something?
There's a story last October about a reporter who tried the entire semester. A student reporter tried the entire semester to get a sit down with Corcoran and was unable to. But just in the last issue, there was a really interesting one where a student actually got to sit down with Corcoran, and it was about the land deal with Manatee. And it's stuff that had all been covered before, except there's like these weird little details. Like there was a mention of that Corcoran was proudly promoting autonomous electrical vehicles are going to take students from the new dorms at the Bayside towards campus. So past the Crossley estate, like whatever, a mile and a half, to get to where the cafeteria is, there's like going to be Disney World style trams, I guess.
That's interesting.
Like, it was just a throwaway paragraph, like buried kind of halfway down the story. And to me, the impressive thing was, oh, a reporter finally got to sit down with Corcoran. And yeah, apparently it's the first time it's happened.
We're breaking this news secondhand. We're re-breaking it right now with you, Stephen. Autonomous.
Well, yeah, the Catalyst is full of like these weird little details, but you know, second day things. But
well, I never heard that before. But
I had the same reaction, kind of staring off from the ceiling and like.
What about just in general? What about the fact that education's become so politicized? Is that surprising to you? Like, you know, I don't know how much you're allowed to talk, you know, outside of your professional responsibilities, but to me, it's interesting that you were interested in political journalism, and then you've been very happy to land in an education beat in Sarasota covering New College. That's probably worth reflecting on for a moment there. Do you have any perspective on that?
I can just say that, like, in the 2 years I've been here, it's gotten worse. Worse is a weird word. Maybe just more intense.
Yeah, more active.
Not as much worse. More so just, like more active. Because New College has flared up obviously over the last year, and then school board meetings have gotten significantly louder since I got here. Every
Mm.
school board meeting is like a 4-hour affair now, whereas before some school board meetings would be like 30 minutes and I'd be home by 5. And it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And at the
but
expense of like the more mundane things that should be covered in school board meetings, the 4 hours
yeah,
are spent for political circus purposes rather than to actually manage the school.
yeah, and it's something I told my editor. It's like I I understand that this is another meeting dominated by, Bridget Ziegler, please resign. And it's like, it keeps going and going. And I told the people who organized all those protests, like, it's obviously something I'm still covering because they've come to me like, we're trying to make it a big deal. Is it still a big deal? And I'm like, look, if you're going to come to these school board meetings for 3 hours and everybody who speaks is going to ask Bridget Ziegler to resign, that's a very prominent part of what happened in the meeting. But at the same time, when it gets to like the 6th meeting, which we're almost at right now of this stuff happening,
Mhm.
there are real things happening and getting voted on in these board meetings that like I still need to cover. Like the last school board meeting story I wrote didn't mention it at all until like halfway down the story that it happened
Yeah.
again. It was about a charter school that they approved. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
this like and what I tried to do in all these other meetings where it happened was like a subheading at the bottom saying like, other items that were approved, like, oh, the district approved to advertise 20 new district policies or 20 updated district policies, which normally would be the headline of the
Yeah.
story because that's a huge
Right.
deal. They have like new guidance on AI and,
Mhm.
uh, different,
Right.
Right.
Like even
The
that. Yeah.
substance.
Hmm. Absolutely.
yeah. And so that's the idea is like, at least for education reporting, which I would say now is probably my more expertise than political reporting, even though it obviously goes hand in hand. Like I've
Yeah.
been doing this every day for 2 years now is like covering education. Like I wish I could cover, Title I schools and the achievement gap. I wish I could cover about teachers and like that's I mentioned it at a public forum here in town. But one of my favorite stories I get to write every year is back to school. The teachers are in the classrooms getting set up and they're all very optimistic about the school year, and you get to ask them what they did over the summer, and it's very human, it's very real. You get to ask them about, are you concerned about the noise outside? And they always tell you, within the walls of my classroom it's just me and the kids, and it's like very optimistic and nice. And so those stories don't get told as much as you'd like, but also all news isn't just like puppies and
Yeah.
rainbows, it's also pretty dirty and difficult. So you balance those stories that should get told, like this teacher who during Hurricane Ian had their house destroyed, so they're basically homeless, but they're still coming in, which is a story I wrote a
Mm.
couple that year. And then there's also the story of like New College where change is happening. It's very messy. It's not a happy story. It's not a feel good story.
No, you make a good point. I mean, all of this noise and all of this chaos and the parade of personalities and the spectacle, it is killing just the functioning, the normal functioning of education. And maybe that's part of their intention, really, is to just clutter things up with drama.
Yeah, it's an idea of like the fire hose of it all. Like if you
Yeah.
don't get the if you're this was like the thing that in the 2020 hindsight of Trump's different candidacies, they would say, well, you're going through a fire hose of Trump things that he said, but are you cutting through to like what's actually happening with the campaign and like who they're
Mhm.
reaching and what the story is versus here's what Trump said today, here's what Trump said yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, when it was first happening, you get the emails of like they're ripping down bulletin boards, they're doing this, and it's like I wrote a story about how they told the what's the name? It's the freshman orientation leaders.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Them to take
pins.
pins off, and it's like, oh my God, that's a huge story. But then at the same time, you can write that story, which is important to tell, but it takes away bandwidth from writing maybe a bigger story, which is something I'm trying to be better at, is like cutting through noise, cutting through a lot of stories that might be very, click worthy, people
Yeah.
want them, but at the same time, the fact that somebody's being forced to remove their pin, is that a story in and of itself, or is it a part of what a larger story is that you can write, and a trend, or a bigger investigation about maybe like First Amendment restrictions at New College or something like
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Or even University.
I wanted to ask you another thing. I know that because so many of these stories that you are telling have national relevance, I see them getting picked up and swooped away, and somebody else kind of takes the story that you did all the work on and basically recapitulates it. How do you deal with that, and how does that feel? That must be very annoying to you.
It is interesting to see like New York Times Magazine came in and wrote a story about new colleges athletics. And I also try to balance it with like at least back like it's still the case today, but like I don't have the bandwidth to do like to follow Amy Reed around for 3 months, which is what the Tampa Bay Times did. Like I can't just do that. Like I'm not a features writer. I'm not,
Mhm.
that's those stories which are great. Like I it's hard to do because national outlets have the bandwidth and also they don't have the responsibility of the day-to-day coverage of this. Whereas I do, they can come in and write more like and they see the gap, right? So like it's not like I have the bandwidth. I definitely have bandwidth, but I don't have bandwidth to write a 3 month long follow Amy Reed story. And that's where outlets that aren't from here see coverage gaps and coverage areas that they can hit on a story, and good on them. But like MSNBC came in and did a story and they consulted me. Like the producers came up to me at a meeting and like connected, and then we got coffee and just talked about new college, and I connected them with people. And then yeah, so seeing like
Nice.
that come in and like they recognize that like I've been here and I know, like that's nice to know, and that they're reading my
Yeah.
stuff. I believe his name's Carlos Suarez from CNN.
Mhm.
At the school board, he was covering the Bridget Ziegler thing, and he came up to me and he's like, "I've been reading all your stuff to catch up on this," and I was like, "Oh, cool." And then, of course, I mean, like they write their own thing, and so they don't have to cite my story. Not that they have to, but I consider myself a coverage leader on New College and on
Yeah.
Definitely.
the school board. So it is nice to get recognition from national outlets, but like it's the same thing. Not exactly the same, but like at school board meetings where I'm sitting at every single one. I remember when I would be the only reporter in the room, and they're passing like 2 field trips for middle school kids or something, and I'm just in there. And then now there's like always a bunch, and there's like TV stations from Tampa here, and I'm like y'all really don't have a clue, do you? Like you don't know the context, you don't know
Right.
like I just saw Tom Edwards give a look to the board attorney. Like you don't know all the minutia behind that body language that just happened because you don't
Mm.
know, you haven't been here for this.
Yeah.
And they come in and I don't know. But yeah,
I wish somebody would cover the Florida Board of Governors the way that you do the school board, because
Right.
that talk about like a cast of characters and personalities who make big decisions
Well,
and seem to.
especially because politically, it does seem like there is a larger strategy to win through boards, like through board appointments and sort of
Yeah, that's the
the kind of the places where folks may not be playing defense, like which new college is a great example of that, where like the seats were a vulnerability, and it's sad that it happened, but like politically, it is kind of the way that game works.
yeah, and I mean it's something where I talked to like some of the advocacy groups around New College, and like ask them for my year recap story of like, you know, a year later type thing. I characterize it as like you're kind of getting bulldozed right now because they have the power to do so, technically and legally. Like is that demoralizing? Where do you go from here? Because
Yeah.
like you mentioned, it is the game. Like there was those vacancies and they appointed people to them.
Right.
It's like the same thing with like, you talk about the federal Supreme Court,
Hmm.
seats come up, people get
Yeah.
appointed. It's not Trump's fault that there was 3
Hmm.
seats to be filled during his term.
I've
It's
never
just
talked so much about school board elections as I am talking about them now, because like those things can tip the balance, and you're reporting on it, like it is real. We're getting close to time. I don't know if folks have well, we have Stephen, March Madness. We haven't talked about March Madness, but man, it's crazy out there and it's March. But any other thoughts, Megan or Grant, before concluding thoughts from you, Stephen?
I was going to ask Stephen, have you been to any of the games of the New College games?
no. I got invited to their opening baseball night, but I just forwarded it to our sports desk, and I think they just sent a photographer.
Hmm.
But I mean, I used to cover sports, which is a whole different can of worms. Before COVID, I like covered men's basketball at
Oh,
UF and
yeah.
stuff. There is an interest there, but I really don't care. Sports games as like sports, there might be like a larger feature, but like it's not relevant to my thing, at least. But I know I haven't been to one. I know that they play at Lecombe Park, right? In
Yeah.
Manatee. which is interesting. But it's weird. You mentioned March Madness. I don't see New College of Florida on the bracket. What is this?
No, it's
You
not.
think they're getting a 16 seed or something?
It's a real wild card.
Yeah,
No, I think they
exactly.
make a deep run this year.
You
I
never
did
know.
remember looking at their schedule, the new college schedule. I saw they played Florida Gulf Coast. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a Division I team. And they got smacked, and I was
Yeah.
like, yeah,
It was hard.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, I'm just learning about all these tiny little colleges in Florida I never heard of because of their season. It's just like, wow, I had no idea these
Ave
colleges
Maria
existed.
is seriously strange. Look into Ave Maria because the history there is amazing. The Catholic Jonestown of Florida.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. It's incredible. I have
Yeah.
a question. I want to know. Okay, you talked about like not having bandwidth and not being able to follow up. Do you have any stories that got away? Like, what got away? What's the one that you really like? Oh, I wish I could have grabbed that one, and there wasn't page space or whatever. We didn't have the column inches.
it wasn't even that though. We didn't have the column inches. It's like, oh, I don't have the time to do this
Yeah.
because I have 2 board meetings this week, and like this also popped up. So this isn't one that really got away, but it's one that I kind of just got busy with, and it's in the
Mhm.
back burner, but that will probably come out eventually. Is like there's a Sarasota school board member whose residency is kind of a question. So it's like she's up for reelection in August. And so right now, I would say I'm actually a little more enterprise focused than I am daily focused. If you want to talk about, I don't know when this podcast will drop, but Sunday paper on what's today, the 15th that we're speaking. So the 17th,
Ah,
there will be a paper with an investigation I just wrapped up into Eddie Spear.
Oh.
Oh, I want to.
yay.
Okay, I would
that's
see that.
exciting. This will go out after that too. That's exciting. Yeah.
That
I
sounds
was-
like
oh, sorry.
fun.
I was
Yeah,
at
if
his
you're-
hearing, and that was amazing. Oh God. Okay.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that. It's not even about that. It's about his congressional campaign.
Yeah.
But yeah, that story will drop on Monday. So I don't know when you're posting this, but if you're hearing this, it might be up. It's on our website, Eddie Spear, and how he runs a congressional campaign out of a 501c3 nonprofit private Christian school. That's a story that did not get away. And I
Yeah.
was excited
And what's
about it.
coming
Hey.
coming home to roost.
Okay.
Nice.
Glad I asked.
But
Yeah.
the Sarasota School Board member, I did look into that a bunch when I knocked on a bunch of doors, talked to her neighbors, and then just got swept away, and it got backburnered for a while, and then it became not time relevant a little bit. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we have time on this. I can just do it in the election cycle. So that's one, I guess, real example of it. But it's honestly like the following, and I always reference this because I was really PO'd when I saw the Tampa Bay Times followed around Amy Reed for 3 months or whatever. And I was like, damn, like I really wish I could have
Yeah.
done that. I didn't even think to do that because it's not even in my mental
Yeah.
to, hey, go to my editor. Hey, you know what I want to do for the next 3 months? Nothing except this. And he'd be like, you're kidding, right? So
Yeah.
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 No, you were needed on the fronts, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for your reporting. Thanks for your service. Any concluding thoughts as we wrap up here, Stephen?
closing thoughts, just please subscribe to the Herald-Tribune. I know a lot of people like to clown our paper for being like a restaurant review paper, but we do a lot of really important work. I think, we have a lot of young people out there now. Like when I started, I was the youngest person by a pretty wide margin. A couple people there were in their 20s, but it was basically us and like a bunch of older people. But then now it's like we have a pretty good coalition of young people that are energetic about covering this area and covering the stories around here. So I'd say please subscribe to the Herald-Tribune. Follow me on Twitter if you care to see basketball tweets and new college news. It's so funny because I've had people who are on those like their activists or their new college parents come up to me and be like, I follow you and I have you on tweet notifications because I love following you. But at the same time, it's really a whiplash to go from like your threads that you do on like the school board, and then I just get a tweet that says, what the heck, Paolo Banchero was just completely hacked there. And it's just like, what is this? Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel like there should be a personal and professional account. Like you're getting the whole me here.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna tweet about how I think Paolo Banchero is better than your best player on your team, and you're gonna if you have me on tweet notifications, congrats! Like you're hearing it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if any of the administration people try to connect with you through the basketball. Like say, hey, I'm.
I know Nate March. I think he still does call. He does call basketball games or sports games.
Oh,
He's
yeah?
in that, so we've connected about that. But
There you go.
I mean, if I see somebody with like a logo on, I always clown them. I like an example would be like my boss is a huge Pacers fan.
Yeah.
Apparently. So I found that out the other day and I was like, oh, you're a Pacers fan? He's like, yeah, you just kicked my team's ass last week. So he's like, yeah, but, you because it's an easy in, right?
Yeah.
The sport.
And now we have the mighty Banyans to chat about.
Oh my God.
Well, thanks again, Stephen, for joining us, and thanks to our listeners. We'll include links to Stephen's info and stuff that we talked about on the show page for the episode, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks for listening.